So we were talking earlier about female genital mutilation, and that's a term that people in Western societies use to refer to practices that are done usually in Africa or the Middle East or in some parts of Southeast Asia. And you can tell from the term mutilation that they're really judging these practices. But then you have to ask, what exactly is the definition of mutilation? And it turns out it's any medically unnecessary alteration of female genitalia. So that means that cosmetic genital surgeries also should count as mutilation, because the WHO doesn't even use a consent criterion. They don't say medically unnecessary alteration of the female genitalia that's non-consensual, in which case, okay, I could see your point. They say any medically unnecessary alteration of the female genitalia, which includes cosmetic labiaplasty, for example. But of course, a bunch of middle-class white women in England do that, so that's not barbaric. And so they don't apply their rules consistently. And now what's happening is younger and younger girls are also asking for labiaplasty in the United States and in Brazil and in Japan and in the United Kingdom. And with the permission of the parents, many surgeons are performing these surgeries when they're not, strictly speaking, medically necessary. They're more to make the girl feel like she's normal according to this new norm. And so what happens is you have these Western institutions that are very happy to wag their finger at the practices of brown people in other countries, but they don't apply the same criticism to their own practices. And so it doesn't feel like it's an ethically consistent view. It feels like it's a further form of cultural imperialism. My own work, I argue that no child should have their genitals cut unless it's medically necessary, whether they're a boy or a girl or an intersex child, because I think it should be about the ability of the person to consent. So I apply the same rule to my own cultural practices as I apply, in other countries. But what is crazy is the institutions that run the global discourse on this, like the World Health Organization, the United Nations, and activist groups, they pretend that they have this ethical concern about protecting children's genital integrity, but they only apply it to the practices of outside groups, and they don't apply it to practices in their own country, and that's just hypocrisy.
How old are these girls that start doing
So
this?
there's increasing evidence in the United Kingdom that some hundreds of cases have been done to girls as young as 11 and 12 and 13. So they're made to feel as though they have abnormal genitalia because they have longer than maybe average labia. But that's not a disease state, and in some cases it's not even clear that it's longer than average. We don't have good statistics on what the average length of the labia are. They'll talk about how it may be uncomfortable for certain activities or something like that. But you think about it, boys have external genitalia that are a lot bigger than the labia. So clearly they don't need genital surgery to be able to ride horses or whatever the argument is. And so a lot of it has to do with this feeling of, I don't feel comfortable in my own body because I see this norm from pornography or whatever it is, where I want to be beautiful according to this surgically modified state. And instead of changing the norm, more and more parents are allowing doctors to change their daughters' bodies, which is of course the same motivation that's happening in a rural village in Africa. They're not trying to harm the girl or their sons, they're trying to change their body to conform to the prevailing norm. And the same thing is happening with intersex surgeries. Parents aren't trying to harm their children. The thought isn't that they're trying to cause them some sort of genital injury. They think that they're helping the child. Any parent anywhere who approves a genital surgery for their children thinks that they're helping the child. But what we're learning more and more is that many of these children grow up to feel not very helped. And in fact, they feel very resentful that something was done to the most private part of their body when they were at their most vulnerable and they couldn't say no. And so now that we know that there is such resentment, there's reason to stop doing these surgeries.